Welcome back to the channel. Today's story will make you think twice about what love really means. It all began on a quiet street in Lekki, Lagos, where a tall man in faded jeans and a plain shirt walked into a compound asking for work as a gateman. Nobody would have guessed he was a billionaire. His name was David, but that day, he introduced himself as Chike, a man looking for an honest job. The house belonged to a young woman named Adaora, known for her sharp tongue and high standards. Her father had traveled abroad, leaving her in charge of their family house. When David knocked that morning, she looked him over suspiciously from head to toe. His shirt looked old, his shoes dusty, but there was something calm about his eyes, steady, almost too confident for a man looking for work. "You said you want to be a gateman?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Yes, madam," he replied softly. "I just need somewhere to work and sleep." She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. Don't cause trouble." That was how it began. Each day, David swept the compound, watered the flowers, and quietly observed how Adaora lived. She wasn't cruel, but she carried herself with a kind of pride that made her seem untouchable. She barely greeted him, often giving instructions without looking up from her phone. But David never complained. At night, he would sit by the gate, smiling faintly as cars passed. He had built empires, signed million-dollar deals, and yet here he was, guarding a compound for the sake of something money couldn't buy: truth. Days turned into weeks. Adaora started noticing the way he worked, how clean the compound looked, how calm he remained even when she scolded him for little things. Something about his quietness began to bother her. She started asking questions. Mornings in Adaora's compound always began with the sound of her blender. She loved making fruit smoothies before work. The smell of pineapple and watermelon would drift across the yard while David swept the front. Sometimes she'd see him through the window, quiet, focused, never rushing. He reminded her of those men who didn't talk much but carried peace around them. One morning, her car refused to start. She hit the steering, frustrated. "Not today, I beg," she muttered. David, hearing the sound, dropped his broom and walked over. "Madam, may I check it?" he asked softly. She gave a doubtful look. You know cars." He smiled slightly. "A little." He lifted the bonnet, fiddled with a few wires, and within minutes, the engine came alive. Adaora blinked. "Wait, you fixed it?" He only nodded and stepped back quietly, wiping his hands on his faded jeans. That was the first day she truly looked at him. The sunlight caught his face, and she noticed how fine his features were: smooth skin, strong jawline, eyes that seemed to hold stories. But she quickly turned away. "Thank you," she said curtly and drove off. That evening, David sat by the gate, eating rice from a small cooler. The security lights cast soft shadows on his face. The street outside buzzed faintly with life, hawkers shouting, a generator humming nearby, the smell of suya floating in the air. For a man who once dined in luxury hotels, this was a different kind of peace. He watched Adaora return later that night, her car lights flashing across his face. She looked tired. "Good night, madam," he greeted. She paused briefly before replying, "Good night." It was small, but something shifted that night. She didn't know why her voice came out softer, or why she glanced back as she walked in. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet charm of a man who expected nothing. Inside, Adaora lay on her bed scrolling through her phone, yet her mind kept wandering to her gateman, his calmness, his confidence, and that strange feeling she couldn't name. Rain came that week, soft and steady. The kind that made the whole compound smell like wet dust and mango leaves. David sat by the gate, holding a small umbrella, watching the drops fall. The streets were quiet, except for the echo of tires splashing through puddles and the distant cry of a roasted corn seller. Inside, Adaora sat on the balcony with a cup of tea. She watched the rain too, eyes drifting to the man outside. He was still sweeping, even though the ground was soaked. Something about his patience unsettled her. She called out, "Chike, you can leave it till later." He looked up with a gentle smile. "It's okay, madam. I'll finish soon." The way he said it, simple, soft, without complaint, made her chest tighten a little. She went back inside, confused by her own thoughts. Later that evening, the power went off. The whole compound dimmed into candlelight and generator noise. Adaora came out to the veranda to breathe, wearing a simple house gown, her hair tied up loosely. David was by the gate, his small radio humming faintly with old high-life tunes. "Chike," she called again, walking closer. "You always listen to this kind of music." He smiled. "It reminds me of home." "Where's home?" she asked. He hesitated for a moment before replying, "Somewhere peaceful." They both laughed softly at how vague that sounded. Then came silence, comfortable, not awkward. Adaora found herself telling him how much she missed her mother, how Legos sometimes felt too loud, too fast. He didn't say much, but the way he listened made her words flow easily. She hadn't talked like that in a long time. When she went back inside, she caught herself smiling for no reason. She shook her head. "What am I even doing?" she muttered, lying down. Yet she couldn't stop thinking about the gateman outside, the man who fixed her car, the man who listened quietly while rain drummed on rooftops. And outside, David looked up at her window, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He whispered to himself, "She's starting to see me." Days turned into a quiet friendship. Adaora began to notice small things about David. The way he always greeted the neighbors, how he helped the children on the street open the gate when it got stuck, how he never seemed in a hurry. Even his handwriting surprised her one afternoon when he signed for a delivery, neat, clean, and almost too polished for a man who claimed to have only finished secondary school. She started offering him food sometimes, pretending it was just leftovers. "I cooked too much," she'd say, sliding a plate through the kitchen window. He would smile, always polite. "Thank you, madam." But one evening, she saw him share that same food with a hungry boy who sold sachet water by the road. He didn't know she was watching from the balcony. Something about that scene stayed in her heart longer than she expected. One Saturday morning, she decided to test him. She called out, "Chike, please help me wash my car." He nodded, got a bucket, and began. But unlike the other workers she had before, he didn't just wash, he detailed the car like it was his own. Every corner shined. When she stepped out to check, she found him on one knee wiping the mirror. "You really take this thing serious," she said teasingly. He looked up with that calm smile. "Anything worth doing is worth doing well." Her laugh came out softer this time. "You sound like someone who's read too many motivational books." He chuckled. "Maybe I've just seen life." That night, Adaora couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, watching the gate light glow faintly on David's face as he rested on a plastic chair. For the first time, she wondered, who really was this man? He didn't act like someone desperate for survival. His composure, his speech, even his silence felt different. Somehow, it made her both curious and afraid. Sunday afternoons in Lagos had their own peace, lazy, slow, and filled with the smell of stew. The compound was quiet that day. Only the hum of a distant generator and the call of a hawker selling roasted plantain broke the silence. Adaora sat under the mango tree reading a magazine, her slippers half off her feet. David was nearby, fixing the gate hinge with a small spanner. Every now and then, she'd glance his way, pretending not to. There was something oddly comforting about his presence. After a while, she spoke without looking up. "Chike, do you ever rest?" He smiled faintly. "When work is done, madam." She closed her magazine and stood. "You've been here for over a month now. You don't go anywhere? No friends? No girlfriend waiting for you somewhere?" He laughed lightly. "No, madam. I keep my peace where I can find it." That answer made her curious. You talk like a pastor sometimes. He grinned. Maybe I'm just grateful for small things. They both laughed, and it felt genuine. Adaora found herself asking questions she hadn't planned to, about his past, his dreams, what he would do if life gave him a second chance. His answers were calm, thoughtful, like a man who'd seen both wealth and pain. Later that evening, she cooked jollof rice and took some to him, pretending it was nothing. I made too much, she said again, trying to hide the smile on her face. He accepted the plate with gratitude. Thank you, madam. Then, after a pause, you don't have to pretend. I know when kindness is real. Her heart skipped. Who says I'm pretending? She replied, a playful frown forming. He only smiled, and that smile lingered longer than usual. As she walked back inside, she realized the sound of his voice stayed with her, calm, grounded, with a warmth that made her feel seen. For the first time in a long while, Adaora didn't scroll through her phone that night. She simply lay there, smiling into the dark. And at the gate, David looked up at her window again, whispering, "She's beginning to care." The dry season came with its sharp sun and restless air. Lagos buzzed louder than usual, but Adaora's compound remained calm, like its own little island. David had become part of the rhythm there, fixing things before they broke, greeting everyone, blending into daily life so naturally that the neighbors began calling him Babagate. Adaora didn't mind. She'd grown used to hearing his voice every morning when she left for work, his quiet, safe journey, madam, following her car out the gate. It felt odd when he wasn't around. One evening, she came home earlier than usual. The sky was tinted orange, the kind of light that makes everything look softer. She found David sitting by the gate with a book in his hand, a worn paperback, its pages yellowed. "You read?" she asked, surprised. He looked up, smiling. "Sometimes. Helps the mind breathe." "What are you reading?" "The Richest Man in Babylon." She laughed lightly. "You really believe in all that?" He nodded. "Money means nothing if you don't understand peace." There was silence, the kind that wasn't awkward but thoughtful. Adaora sat on the low fence beside him, watching the street. Children ran past chasing a plastic ball, a woman balanced a basin of oranges on her head, and the smell of fried puff-puff drifted through the air. It was such a normal evening, yet it felt rare. "Chike," she said softly, "you don't talk much about your life. You act like someone hiding something." He looked at her quietly, then smiled. Maybe some stories sound better when told at the right time. She didn't push further. Instead, she just nodded, watching how the light fell on his face. There was something about him that both drew her in and scared her. When she went inside that night, she found herself restless again. She wanted to know more about this man who lived so simply yet carried himself like someone who had nothing to prove. And outside, David closed his book and whispered to himself, "She's getting closer. Just a little more time." It was a Saturday filled with noise from the neighborhood, the sound of children playing, someone frying akra by the corner, and a loud gospel song pouring from a nearby speaker. Adaora was in the compound washing her clothes when David appeared from behind a gate carrying a small toolbox. "You fix everything in this life," she teased. He grinned. "Not everything. Just what's broken." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe you should fix my washing machine. It stopped working since last week." He nodded without hesitation. "Let me check it." He knelt beside the small machine, unscrewed the panel carefully, and worked in silence while Adaora stood nearby wringing out her clothes. There was something peaceful about watching him, how focused he looked, how patient. She noticed a small scar near his wrist and wondered where it came from. After a while, the machine whirred back to life. She gasped, laughing. "You really fixed it." He smiled up at her. "Told you, madam. Not everything is beyond repair." Their eyes met longer than usual, and something passed between them, unspoken but clear. She quickly looked away, picking up a towel to hide her unease. "Thank you," she muttered. "You're welcome," he said quietly. Later that evening, Adeora's friend Kemi stopped by. The moment she saw David at the gate, she whispered, "That's your gateman?" He's fino." Adeora rolled her eyes. "I beg, leave that thing." But Kemi smirked. "You sure say you never notice." That night, Adeora sat by her window again. She could hear his faint hum from the gate, that same calm rhythm that always soothed her. She thought about how easily he smiled, how he carried himself with quiet pride. Something inside her whispered that he wasn't ordinary. But what if she was wrong? Down by the gate, David looked up at the stars and smiled to himself. He had seen wealth and loneliness, but these small moments, this laughter, felt more real than any luxury he had ever known. Monday mornings were always rushed in Lagos, but Adeora liked to leave the compound quietly before traffic became unbearable. David was already at the gate, sweeping the yard, his movements calm and precise. She paused at the door, watching him for a moment longer than usual. "Good morning, madam," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, her voice almost too quick, like she was trying to hide something. On her way out, she noticed him noticing her too. There was a quiet understanding in his eyes, the kind that made her wonder if he could see past appearances. That evening, she returned with a heavy bag of groceries. She struggled at the gate, and without a word, David appeared, lifting some of the bags effortlessly. She frowned playfully. "You carry everything too easily. You're hiding muscles under that shirt." He chuckled, shrugging. "Just strong enough to help." Inside, she unpacked vegetables and rice, while he sat on the low wall, watching. There was something mesmerizing about his calm presence, a contrast to the chaos of Lagos streets beyond the walls. Later, she decided to test him in a different way. "Chike," she called, "come help me water the garden. Be careful with the roses." He followed quietly, watering every plant meticulously. She stood nearby, arms crossed, trying not to let her gaze linger. Yet she found herself noticing how careful he was, how naturally he moved around the flowers, and how he never looked impatient even when the hose tangled. For the first time, she wondered what he was thinking about, what kind of life he had lived before this one. She wanted to ask, but the right words wouldn't come. That night, she lay on her bed staring at the ceiling. She remembered how he had smiled when she teased him about the hose. She remembered the way he carried the groceries, how he seemed to blend into the rhythm of the house without ever demanding attention. And somewhere outside, David looked up at her window, a faint smile on his face. He whispered into the quiet night, "Little by little, she's letting me in." The next week felt different. Adeora noticed it in the mornings, how David's quiet presence seemed heavier, not just routine. He greeted her with the same calm voice, but sometimes his eyes lingered longer, and she caught a fleeting softness in the way he looked at her. One afternoon, she returned from the market with her arms full of bags. The street outside was noisy, cars honking, a motorbike weaving through traffic. She stumbled slightly over a pothole, and before she could even call out, David was there, steadying her with a firm hand. "Careful, madam," he said, his voice low, almost protective. Her heart thumped, though she told herself it was nothing. Yet she couldn't ignore the warmth that spread through her chest, the strange calm that settled in her stomach. Later that evening, she sat alone in the living room. The generator hummed faintly in the background, the smell of grilled plantain wafting from the street, and she found herself thinking about him, about his quiet strength, his patience, the way he never asked for anything, yet seemed to give everything he had just by being there. She caught herself imagining his past, wondering why a man like him would choose this simple life. Did he carry a secret? Or was it simply who he was? Outside, David sat on the gate step, the night air brushing against his face. He listened to the soft city noises, distant laughter, a car door slamming, the hum of a fridge somewhere. And he thought about Adeora, how she moved through her life with confidence and small guarded smiles. He remembered her laughter that first Saturday, her teasing words, the subtle way she observed him, the curiosity in her eyes that she tried to hide. He whispered to himself softly, almost as if the wind would carry it to her window, "I want to see her smile without walls between us." Inside, Adaora shifted in her seat, a small part of her wishing someone would see her fully, not just the strong, self-sufficient facade she wore daily. She didn't know it yet, but her thoughts had already begun to follow him, the man who carried quiet storms and kindness in equal measure. The night stretched between them, connected by glances, small gestures, and unspoken questions that neither dared to ask aloud. A sudden rainstorm woke Adaora one evening. The sound of water pounding on the roof made the compound smell of wet earth and burning charcoal from a nearby suya stand. She sat by her window, wrapped in a thin shawl, watching the rain streak the yard. David was already outside, holding a small umbrella, making sure the plants didn't get drowned. She caught him through the dim light of the veranda. He looked calm, steady, the rain falling on his shoulders, his shirt clinging slightly, yet he moved with patience. She called out softly, "Chike, you don't have to do all that." He glanced up, water dripping from his hair, and smiled faintly. "Madam, someone has to." She leaned closer to the window, intrigued by how he carried himself, quiet, selfless, patient. She didn't understand why her chest felt tight at the sight of him. The Mun, she reminded herself, was just a gatekeeper, yet he seemed larger than life in his simplicity. Later, she stepped outside to hand him a towel. The rain had softened to a drizzle, the air cool, carrying the distant sound of car horns and a street vendor calling out. Their hands brushed when she passed it to him. For a moment, everything froze, the soft rain, the distant sounds, even the faint smell of wet grass seemed suspended in that tiny heartbeat. "Thank you, madam," he said softly, eyes meeting hers. She swallowed, pretending to adjust the towel. "It's nothing." And yet, inside, a strange warmth spread. She realized she had been thinking of him more than she wanted to admit, the quiet comfort of his presence, the way he seemed to care without asking for anything in return. That night, she lay awake listening to the city hum. She remembered his smile when she teased him about carrying groceries, his patience in fixing the washing machine, the quiet way he watched over the compound. She didn't know how to name it yet, but something had shifted inside her. Outside, David closed his umbrella, shook off the remaining drops, and whispered into the soft night, "She's beginning to feel it too." The rain washed the yard, but it also washed something tender into the spaces between them, small, unspoken, and growing with every passing day. The city had settled into its usual evening rhythm. Car horns, the hum of generators, and distant laughter blended into a soft background. Adaora sat on her balcony, a cup of tea warming her hands. She found herself thinking about David again, the way he moved, the quiet patience he carried, the subtle warmth in his eyes. He appeared at the gate, as usual, sweeping the yard with calm precision. But tonight, something was different. He paused, looking up at her balcony with a faint, almost hesitant smile. She leaned over the railing. "You seem quieter than usual." He looked down, running a hand through his hair. "I was thinking, madam, about how things could be different." Her heart skipped. "Different how?" He met her gaze steadily. "If we didn't have walls between us. If people weren't watching. If I could be more than just the gateman." Adaora's breath caught. She wanted to say something, but fear, pride, and curiosity tangled in her chest. Her fingers tightened around the teacup. "You've been here a long time, Chike," she said softly. I don't know if I'm ready to see more." He nodded, accepting it. "I understand, madam. I'll wait." And yet, she watched him with a strange pull in her chest. For weeks, she had noticed him in ways she hadn't admitted to herself. The quiet laughter, the care for the street children, the patience with the plants, the gentle way he handled her small tests, all of it had built something inside her she couldn't ignore. He continued to sweep the yard, but his movements had a different rhythm now, slower, deliberate, as if every motion carried a message only she could feel. Adaora went inside that night thinking about how simple moments could weigh so heavily: a smile, a glance, a hand brushed by accident. She realized that this Mun, this quiet presence at her gate, had found a way to enter her life without breaking anything. Outside, David paused and looked at her window one last time before night fully settled in. He whispered, "Soon, she'll know the truth. And when she does, everything will change." The night wrapped the compound in silence, but inside, hearts were stirring, and unspoken feelings hovered in the air like the faint scent of wet earth after rain. The morning sun spilled golden light across the compound. Birds chirped, and the distant hum of Lagos traffic drifted faintly through the walls. Adaora opened her door, stretching, her thoughts still tangled from the night before. She noticed David at the gate, sweeping quietly, but today there was a different energy about him, steady, calm, but purposeful. "Good morning, madam," he said softly. She smiled, a little breathless. "Morning." She stepped out fully, deciding to walk beside him. "Chike, can we talk?" He nodded, placing the broom against the wall. There was no teasing, no playful tone, only a quiet patience that had become his signature. "I've been thinking," she began, looking into his eyes, "about us. About how you've been here, quietly, caring for things I didn't even notice. About how you've carried yourself without demanding anything." He smiled faintly, a calm warmth in his eyes. "Madam, there's something I should tell you. I'm not really just a gateman." Her heart skipped. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "My name is David. I've lived a life of wealth and business. But I came here because I wanted to know the truth about people, about love that isn't bought or earned through power." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Adaora studied his face, the honesty in his eyes, the way he stood with humility yet strength. She realized she already knew the truth, in the way he listened, the way he cared, and the way he made her feel safe without ever forcing it. "So, you've been pretending?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yes," he admitted, "but only because I wanted to meet you as you are, not for what I have." Her lips curved into a smile, a mixture of surprise, relief, and affection. "You could have told me." "I wanted you to see me first," he replied gently. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "And I'm glad you did." That day, the sun seemed warmer, the sounds of Lagos lighter. Adaora and David walked slowly through the compound, talking, laughing, noticing small things, the way the wind stirred the mango leaves, the distant call of a street vendor, the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery. In that quiet, ordinary moment, love had bloomed, genuine, patient, and real. And for David, the billionaire who had come as a gateman, it was more valuable than anything money could ever buy.